This sick poor girl was bought by a millionaire, but before everything could go right, the millionaire discovers a secret she was hiding. Comment what you think will happen and subscribe to my channel to support my work. The biting chill of the morning didn't bother Eric Marlowe as much as the uneasy feeling that had been growing in his chest since he woke up. Something was different that day, although he couldn't explain what. He adjusted the tie of his dark grey suit as he watched the city through the window of his penthouse apartment. Down below, New York was already pulsing with its usual frantic rhythm. At 47, Eric had achieved everything he had always wanted. He was the CEO of one of the largest companies in the country, possessed a considerable fortune, and his name was respected in the most influential business circles. But that morning, as he looked in the mirror, he saw something beyond the successful executive. He saw a lonely man. The private elevator took him directly to the garage, where his driver was already waiting. However, contradicting his 20-year habit, he dismissed the car. "I need to walk a little," he said, surprising not only the employee but himself. The impulsive decision was completely contrary to his methodical and calculating nature. The streets of Midtown were bustling, hurried people bumping into each other without apologizing. Eric walked absorbed in thought when a coughing fit caught his attention. Next to the traffic light, partially protected by a drenched awning, stood a girl. She couldn't have been more than 5 years old. What made him stop wasn't just the sight of the child alone, a common sight on the streets of New York, but the object in her hands, an improvised asthma inhaler made with a cut plastic bottle and duct tape. The girl held it tightly, as if her life depended on that precarious device. Their eyes met for a brief moment. The child's eyes, a deep, sad brown, seemed to carry the weight of the world. There was something familiar in that look, something that made Eric's heart clench in a way he hadn't experienced in a long time. The light turned green and people started moving again. Eric remained still, watching the girl. She wore dirty and worn clothes, but there was a certain dignity in her posture. She didn't hold out her hand begging for alms. She didn't cry. She just sat there, hugging her muddy blanket, struggling to breathe. "Are you all right?" he found himself asking. Surprised by his own initiative, the girl didn't answer, just stared at him with those disturbing eyes. A new coughing fit shook her, and Eric noticed how her small body trembled with the effort. That's when he noticed something even stranger. The girl was holding a book, not just any book, but an old edition of The Little Prince, its pages yellowed, and folded at the tips, but still preserved with evident care. "What's your name?" he tried again. This time, after a moment of hesitation, she replied in a low voice, "Serena." The name sounded like a distant echo in Eric's mind, provoking an inexplicable feeling of déjà vu. At that moment, a sharp pain struck his chest, making him stagger. His vision blurred for a moment, and confused images invaded his mind. A hospital, a corridor, distant shouts, the crying of a baby. As quickly as they came, the images disappeared, leaving only a feeling of emptiness and urgency. When he caught his breath, Serena was watching him with an expression that mixed concern and something else, knowledge, perhaps? It was as if she knew exactly what was happening to him. "You need help," she said, her voice surprisingly clear and articulate for such a small child. It wasn't a question, but a statement that carried an inexplicable weight. The pain in Eric's chest intensified. He loosened his tie, feeling cold sweat run down his back. The world began to spin, and the voices of the street seemed distant, muffled. The last thing he saw before losing consciousness was Serena's face, and on it, an expression that seemed to say, "You finally found me." People began to crowd around the fallen businessman. Someone called an ambulance. In the midst of the confusion, no one noticed when little Serena got up, carefully put her book in a worn backpack, and began to follow the ambulance carrying Eric. as if she knew exactly where. She needed to go. What no one knew, not even Eric in his unconscious state, was that this apparently casual encounter marked the beginning of a journey that would change not only their lives, but also reveal secrets buried for years, waiting for the right moment to surface. The smell of antiseptic and the monotonous noise of the heart monitors were the first sensations that Eric registered upon regaining consciousness. He opened his eyes slowly, adapting to the fluorescent light of the hospital room. His head throbbed and the memory of recent events was blurred. "You gave us quite a scare, Mr. Marlowe," said a middle-aged nurse, adjusting the IV drip. "You had a mild heart attack, but you arrived in time. You need to stay under observation for a few days." Eric tried to sit up, but dizziness forced him to remain lying down. The images began to return: the walk, the girl at the traffic light, those disturbing eyes. "The girl," he murmured, more to himself than to the nurse. "What girl, sir?" Before he could answer, the door to the room opened. Lydia, his housekeeper of over 20 years, entered hastily. Her normally serene face was marked by worry. "Mr. Marlowe, thank God you're awake. I came as soon as I heard." Lydia approached the bed, holding Eric's hand with a familiarity that only years of living together allowed. There was something different in her gaze, a restlessness that went beyond concern for his health. "Lydia, there was a girl at the traffic light. I need to find her," Eric said with difficulty, his voice hoarse. The housekeeper exchanged a meaningful look with the nurse, who discreetly left the room. "You need to rest now," she said in a maternal tone, but Eric noticed a hesitation in her voice. "What aren't you telling me, Lydia?" The housekeeper sighed deeply, as if weighing her words. "The girl, she's here at the hospital." Eric tried to get up again, this time ignoring the dizziness. "What do you mean? What happened to her?" "She followed the ambulance, Mr. Marlowe. She sat in the hallway for hours, refusing to leave. The security guards tried to take her away, but she started having such a severe asthma attack that they had to admit her too." A heavy silence fell over the room. Eric closed his eyes, reviewing the girl's face in his mind. The feeling of familiarity returned with full force, accompanied by an inexplicable unease. "There's one more thing," Lydia continued, her voice trembling slightly. "When they asked her name for the admission form, she said it was Serena Marlowe." The heart monitor registered a sudden acceleration. Eric felt the air leave his lungs. "That's impossible," he whispered. "She has documents, Mr. Marlowe. An old yellowed birth certificate, but legitimate, and she has the same birthmark as you on her left shoulder." The world seemed to slow down. Fragments of memory began to surface. A woman crying in his office, papers being signed, a decision made years ago that he had struggled to forget. "Where is she now?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "In room 305, pediatric wing. The doctors are worried. Besides the severe asthma and malnutrition, she's very weak. But that's not all. There's something different about her. The way she talks, the way she looks at people." At that moment, a different nurse entered the room, carrying a clipboard. "Mr. Marlowe, we need to talk about the girl who claims to be your daughter. She's asking to see you." Eric felt his heart clench. "She can't be my daughter," he said, but his voice betrayed the uncertainty that was beginning to grow. "I would know if I had a daughter." The nurse consulted her notes. According to the documents she had with her, the mother's name was Mera. "Oliveira! Does that name mean anything to you?" The name hit Eric like a punch to the stomach. Mera. Of course he knew. How could he forget? The woman who had worked at his company for years, who had been fired after accusations of embezzlement. The woman who had begged for a chance to explain herself, who had tried to tell him something important before disappearing. "Mr. Marlowe," Lydia interrupted his thoughts, her voice laden with guilt. "There's something I need to tell you. Something I've kept for years. Something about Mara." But before she could continue, a commotion in the hallway caught everyone's attention. Shouts and running. "Emergency in 305! The patient is convulsing!" Room 305, Serena's room. Eric ripped the IV from his arm and tried to get up, ignoring the protests of the nurse and Lydia. His legs were trembling, but something stronger than his physical weakness compelled him to go there. He needed to see the girl. He needed to understand what was happening. In the hallway, he saw doctors and nurses running towards Serena's room. Through a crack in the door, he could see the small body convulsing on the bed, her eyes rolling back, her skin as pale as paper. And then, in the midst of the chaos, Serena stopped struggling and looked directly at him. Her lips moved, forming words that only Eric seemed to hear. "You promised you'd come back for me." The world spun again, and Eric felt his legs give way. As he fell, thousands of images exploded in his mind. Myra, pregnant in his office, his own voice saying she was lying, that it was a scam, the security order to remove her from the building, an unopened letter, a promise never kept. The thing he saw before losing consciousness was Lydia's face, aged by the guilt of a secret kept for too long. In her hands, a yellowed envelope trembled, waiting for the right moment to reveal a truth that would change everything. The yellowed envelope trembled in Lydia's hands while the doctors tried to stabilize Eric. The businessman had been rushed back to his room, where he was now receiving intensive care. The housekeeper remained seated in the waiting room, her face marked by silent tears that carried the weight of years of secrets. The letter she held had been delivered 15 years ago, on a rainy night. Myra had appeared at the mansion, soaked and desperate, begging to speak with Eric. He wasn't home, and Lydia, following express orders, hadn't let her in. "Please," Myra had pleaded, "at least give this to him. It's about our daughter." Lydia never delivered the letter. At the time, she believed she was protecting her boss from another attempted scam. Eric was at a crucial moment in business, and she couldn't allow anything to destabilize him. The letter was kept in an old box, along with her own guilt and regrets. In the hospital corridor, the doctors were still struggling to stabilize Serena. The girl had fallen into a coma after the seizure, her small body connected to various machines that beeped in an agonizing rhythm. Dr. Carlos, the doctor in charge of the case, approached Lydia with a serious expression. "Are you responsible for the girl at the moment?" "No. I mean Mr. Marlowe. He's her father." The doctor consulted his notes. "We need authorization for some procedures. The situation is delicate. Besides the severe asthma and malnutrition, she has symptoms that we can't explain. It's as if her body is—" He hesitated, choosing his words, "fading away little by little." Lydia clutched the envelope to her chest. "Can I see her?" In the room, Serena seemed even smaller, surrounded by all that equipment. Her skin was so pale that it almost blended with the white sheets. Next to the bed, on a small table, was the worn backpack she carried with her. Lydia approached and, moved by an impulse, opened the worn zipper. Inside the backpack were few belongings: the book The Little Prince, some folded papers, a small notebook, and an old photograph, yellowed at the edges. Lydia's heart stopped when she recognized the image. It was Mara, smiling, with a clearly pregnant belly. The photo had been taken in the back of the company, near the garden where she used to have lunch. "Ma'am?" A young nurse touched her shoulder gently. "Mr. Marlowe is awake and asking for the girl." In Eric's room, the businessman was sitting on the bed, paler than normal, but conscious. His eyes fixed immediately on the envelope that Lydia was carrying. "What's that?" The housekeeper sat heavily in the chair next to the bed. Her hands were shaking so much that she could barely hold the envelope. A letter, Mr. Marlowe, from Mara. She tried to deliver it 15 years ago. Eric took the envelope as if it could burn his fingers. The paper was yellowed with time, but the name Eric was still visible in Mara's delicate handwriting. With trembling fingers, he opened the letter and began to read aloud, "Dear Eric, when you read this letter, it may already be too late. Not for me, but for our daughter. Yes, she is your daughter, no matter how much you have refused to believe. I tried to tell you so many times, but you were blinded by power, by distrust, by your own ambition. I'm not asking for anything for myself. The accusations of embezzlement were false, but that doesn't matter now. What matters is that our daughter is sick. She was born with a rare condition, something that the doctors can't explain. They say it's as if she carries a sadness so deep that her body can't bear it. I tried all possible treatments, sold everything I had, but nothing works. The doctors say she needs something that medicine can't give. She needs her father, Eric. She needs your love, your recognition. There's an ancient prophecy in my family, passed down from generation to generation. It says that some children are born with the gift of healing hardened hearts, but that this gift takes a very high price. They carry all the pain that their parents refuse to feel, all the love that they deny themselves. Our daughter, Serena, is one of those children, and she's dying because of it. If one day you find her, please don't reject her again. She has your birthmark, the one you showed me once, saying that it was a gift that skipped generations in your family. It's in the same place, on the left shoulder. I know that when you read this, I probably won't be here anymore. The same illness that afflicts our daughter has begun to consume me too. The doctors say it's psychosomatic, but I know the truth. It's the price I pay for not being able to protect her, for not being strong enough to make you see the truth. Forgive me for not fighting harder. Forgive me for allowing fear and pride to prevent me from insisting. But above all, forgive yourself, Eric. Only then will you be able to save her. With love, even after everything, Mara. The silence that followed the reading of the letter was broken only by the sound of the heart monitors. Eric let the paper fall onto his lap, his face a mask of pain and regret. Long repressed memories began to surface. The glances exchanged with Myra in the hallways of the company, the conversations in the garden during lunch, the moment when she tried to tell him about the pregnancy and he, blinded by distrust and fear of a scandal, accused her of trying to pull a fast one. "Why didn't you ever give me this letter?" His voice came out choked, his eyes fixed on Lydia. The housekeeper wiped away the tears that were flowing freely down her face. "Because I didn't believe her either, Mr. Marlowe. Because I thought I was protecting you. Everyone said she was a gold digger, that she was trying to take advantage, and now..." Her voice failed. "Now that girl is dying in the room next door, and it's my fault too." At that moment, a commotion in the hallway caught their attention. Dr. Carlos's voice sounded urgent. "She's going into collapse. We need help here." Eric tore the wires from the monitors and got up, ignoring the dizziness and pain. Staggering, supported by Lydia, he headed to Serena's room. Through the open door, he saw his daughter. Yes, now he was absolutely sure that she was his daughter, fighting for her life. The heart monitor emitted an increasingly weak sound, and Serena's face was paler than ever. Amid the chaos of doctors and nurses trying to save her, Eric saw something that no one else seemed to notice: a solitary tear running down the girl's face. Time seemed to have frozen in room 305. The doctors and nurses moved as if in slow motion. In Eric's eyes, who remained paralyzed in the doorway, watching his daughter fight for her life. The intermittent beep of the heart monitor marked each second of agony, each precious moment that slipped through his fingers like sand. "Excuse me, sir, you need to give us space." A nurse tried to push him away, but Eric couldn't move. His Eyes were fixed on Serena's small hand, which hung inert beside the bed. A hand that should have held his during all these years, a hand that he should have protected. Dr. Carlos administered medications in sequence, his forehead furrowed in concentration. "Pressure dropping," a nurse announced. "Saturation at 82%, reported another. The numbers meant nothing to Eric, but the urgent tone of the voices said everything. It was then that something inexplicable happened. In the midst of the chaos, Serena opened her eyes. They were no longer the frightened eyes of the girl from the traffic light, but eyes that carried an ancient, almost supernatural wisdom. Her gaze met Eric's, and for a moment everything else disappeared. "Dad," she whispered, her voice so low that only Eric heard. "You need to remember." "Remember what?" he asked, taking a step forward, ignoring the protests of the medical team. "The garden, the promise, the day you smiled for the last time." The words hit Eric like a lightning bolt. A long-buried memory began to emerge. A garden in the back of his company, a wooden bench under an old tree, Myra sitting next to him, laughing at something he had said. It was a spring day. The flowers colored the surroundings, and for the first time in years, he felt truly happy. "It was the day you told me you loved me," Serena's voice continued, getting weaker and weaker. "The day you promised you would always protect me, even without knowing I existed." Lydia, who was watching the scene from the door, let out a muffled sob. She remembered that day. It was one of the rare times she had seen her boss truly happy, before power and ambition transformed him into the cold man he had become. "But I didn't keep my promise," Eric murmured, tears streaming down his face. "Without him noticing, I failed you, your mother." "It's not too late," Serena replied, her voice now just a whisper, "but it needs to be now. You need to remember who you were before. The man who knew how to love." The heart monitor began to emit a more erratic sound. Dr. Carlos turned his attention to the devices, his expression increasingly worried. "She's going into arrhythmia. Prepare the defibrillator." But Eric barely heard. He was lost in the memories that were now flowing like a torrent. Myra telling him about her dreams, about how she wanted to change the world, about how she saw goodness in him when not even he could see it. He remembered the exact moment when he decided that power was more important than love, the day he locked his heart and vowed never to allow himself to be vulnerable again. "You built walls so high," Serena continued, her voice entering directly into his mind now, "that you forgot what the sky looks like. Each brick was made of fear, of pride, of greed, and I was born carrying all that weight." The machines began to beep frantically. "Ventricular fibrillation," shouted a nurse. "We need to act now." "Stand back," ordered Dr. Carlos, positioning the paddles of the defibrillator. "No!" Eric stepped forward, pushing the doctors aside. In a movement that surprised everyone, including himself, he took Serena in his arms, ignoring the wires and tubes that connected her to the machines. "What are you doing?" "She's going to die," shouted the doctor. "No, she won't," replied Eric with a certainty that came from the depths of his soul. "Because now I remember everything." Holding his daughter close to his chest, he began to speak, his voice choked but firm. "That day in the garden, I promised that I would always protect love. Not you specifically, because I didn't know you existed, but I promised your mother that I would never let power change who I was. I promised that I would keep my heart open, that I would never become like my father." Tears fell on Serena's pale face as he continued. "But I broke that promise. I became exactly what I swore never to be. And you, my daughter, were born carrying all the weight of that betrayal. Every moment of happiness that I denied myself, every piece of love that I rejected, all of that turned into a disease that is consuming you." The devices continued beeping wildly, but no one dared to interfere. There was something almost sacred happening in that room. something that transcended traditional medicine. "But now I understand," Eric continued, his tears mixing with Serena's. "You're not sick. You're carrying my illness, my fear of loving, my fear of being vulnerable, my fear of becoming the man I promised to be." At that moment, something extraordinary happened. The heart monitor, which had previously shown erratic signs, began to stabilize. Serena's breathing, previously shallow and difficult, became deeper and more regular. "The prophecy," whispered Lydia from the door, remembering the words in Myra's letter. "Some children are born with the gift of healing hardened hearts, but they pay a very high price for it," completed Eric, finally understanding. "They carry all the pain that we refuse to feel." Serena opened her eyes again, and this time there was a different shine in them, a shine of life, of hope. "You remembered," she said, her voice stronger now, "remembered who you were before you forgot how to love." Dr. Carlos approached cautiously, checking the monitors with an expression of disbelief. "This is impossible," he murmured. "Her vital signs are stabilizing. It's as if a spell was being broken," completed Lydia, a smile through tears forming on her face. But Eric knew it wasn't a spell. It was something much deeper, much more real. It was the power of true love, of sincere regret, of redemption. It was the price being finally paid, not by his daughter, but by himself. The following hours were of intense activity at the hospital. Tests were carried out, specialists were consulted, and a series of tests were conducted to understand Serena's sudden recovery. The doctors couldn't explain how a patient on the verge of death had stabilized so quickly, without any traditional medical intervention. Eric didn't leave his daughter's side for a moment. Sitting in an uncomfortable armchair next to the bed, he watched Serena's every movement, every breath, as if he feared she might disappear if he blinked. The girl's face had regained some color, and her breathing was more regular, although she still needed supplemental oxygen. Lydia entered the room carrying a tray with tea and some toast. "You need to eat something, Mr. Marlowe," she said in a maternal tone, placing the tray on the bedside table. Her eyes were swollen from crying so much, but there was a new light in them, as if a huge weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "I'm not hungry," replied Eric automatically, his eyes fixed on Serena. "The girl will need you strong," insisted Lydia. "And there's something else." She hesitated, fidgeting with her apron. "I found more things in her backpack, things you need to see." Eric finally looked away from his daughter. Lydia took out a small notebook with a faded blue cover and some loose sheets of paper from her apron pocket. "They're diaries from Mira and the girl." With trembling hands, Eric picked up the loose sheets first. They were drawings made by Serena. A man in a grey suit looking out the window of a tall building, a woman lying in a hospital bed, a garden with an empty bench under a tree. The drawings were surprisingly detailed for a 5-year-old, and each of them seemed to tell a part of the story that he had forgotten. "How could she know all this?" he murmured, running his fingers over the drawing of the garden, the same garden where he had made that promise so many years ago. "There's more," said Lydia, opening the blue notebook to a marked page. "This is from Mara. They're the last things she wrote before." The housekeeper's voice failed, but it wasn't necessary to complete the sentence. Eric began to read, immediately recognizing Myra's delicate handwriting. "My dearest Serena, I know I won't be here to see you grow up. The disease is progressing rapidly, and the doctors no longer know what to do. But I need you to understand some things about your father, about me, about the gift you carry. You were born different, my love, born with a sensitivity that goes beyond normal, with an ability to feel the pain of others as if it were your own. It's a precious gift, but also dangerous. Your grandmother warned me about it when you were born, told me about other children in our family who had the same gift, children who could heal hearts hardened by power and ambition, but who paid a terrible price for it. Your father is not a bad man, Serena. He just got lost along the way, forgot who he really was. When I met him, he had dreams beyond money and power. He wanted to make a difference in the world. He wanted to help people. We fell in love in that garden behind the company where he used to go to escape the pressures of work. It was there that he made the promise he ended up breaking. He said he would never let power change who he was, that he would keep his heart open, that he would be different from his own father. But the business world is cruel, my daughter. Little by little, I saw the man I loved turn into someone I no longer recognized. When I found out I was pregnant, I tried to tell him in every way, but he was already so changed, so consumed by distrust, that he didn't want to listen to me. He accused me of trying to pull a scam, humiliated me, fired me. The shock of that rejection affected you even in my womb. That's when the first symptoms appeared in both of us. The doctors call it a psychosomatic illness, but it's much more than that. It's as if all the love that your father denied himself, all the goodness that he repressed, all the weight of the broken promises had materialized into a physical disease. And you, my love, were born carrying all that burden. I know that one day you will find him. The gift you have will guide you to him when the time is right. And when that happens, you will have to be strong, because only you can help him remember who he really is, to break down the walls that he has built around his own heart. But remember, the price cannot be your life. Don't let the disease consume you as it is consuming me. When you find your father, make him understand that the cure is in himself, in the love that he needs to rediscover, in the promises that he needs to renew. Always keep with you the book, The Little Prince. It was the book that your father read in the garden that day, when he told me that he was afraid of becoming an adult who only cared about serious things. The book that he gave me, saying that whenever I read it, I would remember to keep his childlike heart alive. My sweet Serena, you are the living proof of the love that existed between us, a love that was strong enough to create life, even in the midst of so much pain. Don't let that love be lost. Use your gift to heal, but don't forget to heal yourself too. With all my love, Mom. Eric let the notebook fall onto his lap, tears flowing freely down his face. He looked at Serena, sleeping peacefully in the hospital bed, and saw for the first time how much she resembled Myra. The same serene expression, the same silent strength. "The book," he said suddenly, turning to Lydia. "Where's the little prince?" The housekeeper took the battered book from Serena's backpack and handed it to him. Eric opened it carefully, and a photo fell from between its pages. It was himself, sitting on the garden bench, reading that same book, with a smile that he had long forgotten how to give. At that moment, Serena stirred in the bed, her eyes opening slowly. "You found," she said, her voice still weak but clear, "the place where you promised never to forget how to love." Eric got up and sat on the edge of the bed, holding his daughter's small hand. "I remember now," he said softly, "and I promise I'll never forget again." A soft smile formed on Serena's lips, but her eyes continued to carry a wisdom beyond her age. "It's not over yet, Dad," she whispered. "There's still so much love locked inside you, and until you release it all, the illness will keep trying to take me away." Serena's words echoed in Eric's mind like a dark warning. The illness was still there, lurking, waiting to strike again. He could see it in her eyes, that glimmer of wisdom mixed with a deep exhaustion, as if every moment of consciousness was a battle. "How can I help you?" he asked, his voice betraying the despair he felt. "Tell me what to do, and I'll do it." Serena squeezed his hand weakly. "It's not that simple, Dad. It's not something you can solve with money or power. It's about letting love back in, about fixing all the hearts you hurt along the way." Lydia, who was watching the scene in silence, let out a muffled sob. She knew exactly what the girl was talking about. Over the years, she had witnessed countless times how her boss had become increasingly hard, more ruthless in business and in personal life. "There's a list," Serena continued, her voice now just a whisper. "In my notebook, Mom wrote down the names, all the people who need healing." With trembling hands, Eric picked up the blue notebook again and flipped through it until he found a page with a list of names. His heart clenched as he recognized each one of them. Employees he had fired unfairly, partners he had betrayed, people he had hurt in his blind pursuit of power. George Mendez, he read aloud the first name on the list. "My God, George. The man who tried to warn you about the fraud at the company," said Serena, as if she knew the story. "You didn't want to listen. You fired him and destroyed his reputation. He lost everything. His house, his family, his dignity." Eric closed, his eyes, the memory of that day coming back with full force. George had been his financial manager for 15 years. He had tried to alert him to irregularities that would later prove to be true, but Eric was blinded by greed, by the promise of greater profits. "How do you know all this?" he asked, although he already suspected the answer. "The gift," replied Serena, her breathing getting more difficult. "I can see people's pain, especially the pain you caused. Each person on that list. Their pain is like a weight I carry, and it will only diminish when you fix what you did." Dr. Carlos entered the room at that moment, frowning at the monitors. "Her saturation is dropping again," he said, adjusting the oxygen flow. "She needs to rest." But Serena refused to sleep. With a strength that seemed impossible for her fragile body, she held her father's hand more firmly. "It needs to be now," she insisted. "We don't have much time." Eric looked at the doctor, who just shrugged, powerless in the face of a situation that escaped all his medical experience. "What do you want me to do?" he asked his daughter. "Start with George," she replied. "He lives in a poor neighborhood now, works as a street vendor. Every morning, he stops at that same traffic light where you found me. How will I make him forgive me after everything I've done?" A small smile formed on Serena's lips. "It's not about making someone forgive you, Dad. It's about deserving forgiveness." At that moment, a new coughing fit overcame her, stronger than the previous ones. Her small body contorted with the effort, and spots of blood began to appear on the handkerchief that Lydia quickly placed over her mouth. "Serena!" Eric shouted, desperate, as the doctors rushed to attend to her. "Go!" she managed to say between fits of coughing. "Find George. Show him that there's still goodness in your heart." Dr. Carlos was already preparing a syringe with medication. "Mr. Marlowe, you need to give us space." Eric stepped back reluctantly, his heart torn between the desire to stay with his daughter and the urgent need to do what she asked. It was Lydia who decided for him. "Go, Mr. Marlowe," said the housekeeper firmly. "I'll stay with her. The girl is right. We don't have much time." With a last look at Serena, who was now receiving oxygen through a mask, Eric left the hospital. The sun was rising, painting the sky with rosy tones that he hadn't noticed in years. He walked to the traffic light where he had found his daughter, his heart beating faster and faster as he approached. And there was George, exactly as Serena had said. Older, thinner in worn clothes, selling candies and sweets to drivers. His eyes, once lively and determined, now carried a resignation that broke Eric's heart. He approached slowly, feeling the weight of each step. George saw him when he was still a few feet away. His face paled, and he instinctively took a step back as if expecting another blow. "George!" Eric called, his voice trembling. I need to talk to you." "I have nothing to say to you," replied George, his voice full of bitterness. "You've already taken everything you could from me." "Please!" Eric pleaded, doing something he had never imagined doing. He knelt in the middle of the sidewalk in front of his former employee. "My daughter is dying, George, and I can only save her if I fix the mistakes I've made." George looked at him with distrust. "Daughter? What daughter? The all-powerful Eric Marlowe doesn't have children." "I do. A daughter I didn't even know existed until a few days ago. A daughter who is paying the price for all the evil I've done, for all the love I've denied." Tears were flowing freely down Eric's face now. "And she's dying, George. Dying because I became a monster, because I hurt good people like you." Something in the genuine desperation in Eric's voice made George hesitate. People hurried by on the sidewalk, some casting curious glances at the unusual scene, the powerful businessman kneeling before a street vendor. "What do you want from me?" asked George finally, his voice softer. "I want to fix what I did," replied Eric. "I can't undo the past, but I can try to make things right now. Please let me try." A heavy silence settled between the two men. The traffic light changed several times, cars passed, the city continued its frantic pace, but there, in that small space of sidewalk, time seemed to have stopped. Finally, George reached out to help Eric up. "Tell me about your daughter," he said simply. And there, in the same place where this whole story had begun, two broken men began the long process of healing. Not only themselves, but a little girl who carried the weight of so much denied love. The coffee shop was simple, a neighborhood diner where George used to have his meals. The contrast between this environment and the luxurious restaurants that Eric frequented couldn't be greater. But for the first time in a long time, he didn't care about appearances. "My wife left me after I lost everything," George was saying, absent-mindedly stirring the already cold coffee in his cup. "Took our children to the countryside, to her parents' house. It's been 3 years since I've seen them." Each word was like a stab in Eric's heart. He remembered clearly the day he had authorized his legal department to sue George for defamation after he tried to expose the irregularities in the company. It wasn't enough to have fired him. Eric had made sure to completely destroy his reputation. "I was blind, George," he admitted, his voice choked. "So obsessed with power and control that I couldn't see the harm I was causing. And now your daughter is paying the price," George concluded, finally looking into the eyes of his former boss. "It's funny how life collects its debts, isn't it?" At that moment, Eric's cell phone rang. It was Lydia. His heart froze as he answered the call. "Mr. Marlowe," the housekeeper's voice was tense. "The fever is back. The doctors, they don't know what to do anymore." Eric closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the urgency. "How is she?" "She's asking for you. And for George. She said she needs to know if you really understood." George watched intently the change in Eric's expression. There was something different about him now, a vulnerability that he had never seen before in the man he had known. "I need to get back to the hospital," Eric said after hanging up. But before, he took an envelope from the inside pocket of his jacket and placed it on the table. "This is a full confession. I admit everything. The fraud you discovered, how I manipulated evidence to incriminate you, all the documents that prove your innocence." George picked up the envelope with trembling hands. "Why?" "Because it's the truth. And because my daughter is teaching me that some debts can only be paid with honesty." Eric paused, taking a deep breath. "There's one more thing. In this other envelope is a check. It's compensation for everything you've lost, including interest from all these years." "I don't want your money," George replied automatically. But Eric interrupted him. "It's not for you, it's for your children, so that you can give them everything you couldn't in these years, so that you can get your family back." George's hands trembled even more as he opened the second envelope. When he saw the amount of the check, his eyes filled with tears. It was Enough money to start over, to bring his family back, to give his children the education he had always dreamed of. "I can't accept," he began to say, but something in his tone of voice had changed. "Please," Eric pleaded. "Not for me. For Serena. She carries all this pain, George. Your pain, the pain of your children, the pain of everyone I've hurt, and she's dying because of it." George was silent for a long moment, looking at the two envelopes in his hands. Finally, he looked up at Eric. "I want to meet her," he said, simply. The return to the hospital was tense. In the elevator, Eric explained to George about Serena's special gift, about how she could feel people's pain, about how she was literally dying because of the weight of so much suffering. When they arrived at room 305, they found Serena awake, paler than ever, but with a small smile on her lips as she saw the two men entering together. "You did it," she whispered, extending her small hand towards them. George approached the bed, visibly moved to see the girl. There was something familiar about her, something that reminded him of his own children. "They miss you," Serena said softly, as if reading his thoughts. "Every night before going to sleep, your youngest daughter looks at your photo and asks her mother to tell stories about you." George choked, surprised. "How can you know that?" "It's her gift," Eric explained, but Serena interrupted him with a coughing fit. "It's not just the gift," she managed to say between gasps. "It's love. Love always knows, always finds a way." Dr. Carlos entered the room at that moment, checking the monitors with concern. "The fever isn't subsiding," he murmured, more to himself than to the others. "Because it's not over yet," Serena said, her voice getting weaker and weaker. "George is just the first. There are others, so many others." She closed her eyes, exhausted, and George approached the bed further, taking her small hand in his. "You remind me of my Maria," he said softly. "She also has this way of seeing through people." "I know," Serena smiled, still with her eyes closed. "And she's going to be so happy when you come back. But first—" She opened her eyes, looking directly at George. "You need to forgive my father, really. Not for him, but for yourself." The room fell silent. George looked at Eric, who was standing at the foot of the bed, silent tears running down his face. "For a long time," George began slowly, "I nourished this hatred, this anger. I thought it was what kept me strong, what made me move forward. But now—" He looked again at Serena, at her innocence and wisdom mixed in an inexplicable way. "Now I understand that this hatred was only poisoning me, poisoning my family." Serena nodded weakly, and the monitors began to show a small improvement in her. Vital signs. "I forgive you, Eric," George said finally, his voice firm and sincere. "Not for the money, not for the confession, but because I need to free myself from this weight. I need to return to my family as the man I was before, not as this bitter person I became." The moment those words were spoken, something extraordinary happened. Color began to return to Serena's face, her breathing became easier, and the heart monitor showed more regular beats. "It's working," Dr. Carlos murmured, impressed. "It's as if she were healing in real time." But Serena, although visibly better, still maintained a worried expression. "It's just the beginning," she said, her voice stronger now, but still tired. "There are other names on the list, other pains to heal." She looked at her father with a mixture of love and urgency. "And each time it's going to be harder, because the next people, some of them aren't as ready to forgive as George." Eric picked up the blue notebook again, turning to the page with the list of names. The next name made his blood run cold: Helena Campos, the woman who had been his partner, his friend, and whom he had betrayed in the worst possible way. "She lost everything," Serena said, reading the expression on her father's face. The company she built from scratch, the house she loved so much, even custody of her son, and unlike George, she swore she would never forgive you. George, who was still holding Serena's hand, squeezed it gently. "I'll go with you," he said to Eric. Maybe my story can help." Serena smiled, but it was a sad smile. "It's going to take more than stories this time, Dad. Helena is dying, and she doesn't even know that part of her illness is also because of you." St. Mary's Hospital was on the other side of town, in a simple neighborhood where Helena Campos now lived. It was a shocking contrast for those who knew her in her glory days, when she ran one of the largest pharmacy chains in the state. Eric and George found Helena in room 412, a shared room with 3 other patients. She was unrecognizable. Her hair, once always impeccably styled, was thin and lifeless. Her face, which used to sport a confident smile, was marked by illness and bitterness. "What are you doing here?" Her voice came out hoarse and hostile as she saw Eric standing in the doorway. "Did you come to finish what you started?" George stepped forward, placing himself between the two. "Helena, please listen. There's something you need to know." "George?" Helena blinked, confused. "What? How?" Her eyes went from one man to the other, trying to understand that improbable partnership. Eric took a deep breath, remembering Serena's words. "Helena, I know I have no right to be here, but I need to tell you a story. A story about a girl who is dying because people like me destroyed lives like yours." "What girl?" Helena asked, her curiosity momentarily overcoming her hostility. "My daughter," replied Eric, his voice trembling. "A daughter I didn't even know I had until a few days ago. A child who, in some way I can't explain, carries all the pain that I caused to people like you and George." Helena let out a bitter laugh that soon turned into a cough. "You, with a daughter, the man who said family was for the weak, that power was the only thing that mattered?" "I was wrong," Eric admitted, approaching the bed. "I was so wrong about everything, and now my daughter is paying the price." George interjected, telling his own story, how he had found Eric that morning, how he had met Serena. As he spoke, Helena listened in silence, her expression wavering between disbelief and something deeper, more painful. "Do you remember the day, Helena?" Eric asked softly. "The day you came to my office with the evidence of the fraud in the import of medicines?" Helena closed her eyes, as if the memory was too physical to bear. "You said I was crazy, that I had forged the documents. You reported me to the FDA. And in a week," Eric continued, his voice laden with shame, "your pharmacies were shut down. Your assets frozen. Your ex-husband used the scandal to get custody of Pedro." "My son," Helena whispered, and for the first time tears began to stream down her face. "He was only 6 years old. Now he doesn't even recognize me anymore." "You have cancer," a child's voice sounded from the door, making everyone turn around. Serena was there, in a wheelchair pushed by Lydia. She was pale and visibly exhausted, but her eyes shone with a supernatural intensity. "Serena!" Eric ran to her. "You shouldn't have left the hospital." "I needed to come," she replied simply, her eyes fixed on Helena, "because she needs to know the truth about her illness." Helena looked at the girl with a mixture of fascination and fear. There was something in Serena's gaze that seemed to penetrate her soul. "The cancer started the day you lost everything," Serena continued. "Not in your bones, as the doctors say. It started in your heart, in the part that held the love for your son, for your profession, for life, the part that my father helped to kill." How can you know this?" Helena asked, her voice trembling. "Because I feel," Serena replied, making her wheelchair approach. "The bed with Lydia's help. I feel your pain as if it were my own. The longing for Pedro every night, the fear of dying without being able to explain to him that you never wanted to abandon him, the anger you hold against my father, an anger so great that it is literally killing you. Helena covered her face with her hands, sobbing. It's been 6 years since I've seen my son. 6 years since your father destroyed everything I built. And now you're dying, Serena said softly, not only from cancer but from the weight of so much hatred. The girl extended her small hand, touching Helena's arm. At the moment of contact, something extraordinary happened. Helena gasped, as if she had received a shock, and Serena paled even more. What is that?" Helena asked, feeling a strange heat spread through her body. "It's her gift," Lydia explained, her own tears running silently. "She can feel your pain. She can even absorb it. But every time she does this, every time I get weaker," Serena completed, her voice just a whisper, "because it's not how it should be. It's not me who should heal this pain." She looked significantly at Eric, who understood immediately. He approached Helena's bed and for the second time that day knelt down. "Helena," he began, his voice choked, "I destroyed your life out of greed. You discovered that I was importing counterfeit drugs, that I was putting lives at risk for money. Instead of admitting and correcting my mistake, I chose to destroy you." He took another envelope from his pocket. "Here is my full confession. All the evidence you had was right. I've already sent copies to the authorities and the press. Your innocence will be proven, your reputation restored." Helena took the envelope with trembling hands. "Why? Why now?" "Because every minute that passes without me correcting my mistakes is one less minute of life for my daughter," Eric replied, tears flowing freely down his face. "And because you deserve justice, you deserve to have your son back, your dignity back." Serena, who was still holding Helena's arm, suddenly let out a small groan of pain. Her skin was paler than ever, and drops of cold sweat shone on her forehead. "She can't take it anymore," Lydia warned, alarmed. "We need to take her back." "No," Serena protested weakly. "Not until Helena understands, not until she is freed." Helena looked from the girl to Eric, her own tears now running freely. "How much hatred I kept," she whispered. "How much poison I let grow inside me. And now this innocent child is dying because of it." "Not only because of that," Serena said, her voice getting weaker and weaker. "She's dying because she needed you both to understand. Sometimes forgiveness isn't about deserving. It's about freeing yourself." At that moment, Serena convulsed violently in her wheelchair. Lydia screamed for help as Eric ran to hold his daughter. "No!" Helena tried to get out of bed. "The girl! Please, someone help her!" Doctors and nurses invaded the room, creating a chaotic scene. While they tried to stabilize Serena, Helena held Eric's hand with surprising strength. "I forgive you," she said, tears streaming down her face. "God help me, but I forgive you. Now save your daughter. Don't let her carry this weight. Don't let her pay for our mistakes." The return to the hospital was a race against time. In the ambulance, Eric held Serena's cold hand while the paramedics struggled to stabilize her. The girl had lost consciousness during the seizure, and her breathing was getting weaker and weaker. "Pressure dropping," shouted one of the paramedics. "We need venous access now." Lydia, who had managed to get a seat in the ambulance thanks to Helena's insistence, prayed softly, her silent tears mixing with the beads of the rosary she clutched between her fingers. George followed closely behind in his car with Helena, who had refused to stay behind, despite her own condition. In the emergency room, Dr. Carlos was already waiting with an emergency team. His face darkened as he saw Serena's condition. "Straight to the ICU," he ordered, running alongside the stretcher. We need full ventilatory support. Eric tried to follow but was barred at the entrance to the ICU. He stood there looking through the glass as the medical team worked frantically around his daughter's small body. Every second seemed like an eternity. You shouldn't have let her leave the hospital, Dr. Carlos said harshly after coming out to give news. Her body is very weak. I don't know if... Don't finish that sentence, Eric interrupted, his voice trembling. She will survive. She has to survive. Helena, who was sitting in a wheelchair nearby, approached. Despite her own fragility, there was a new strength in her eyes. Doctor, she called, I need you to understand something. What's happening to this girl? It's not a common illness. Dr. Carlos frowned. Ma'am, with all due respect. No, listen to me, Helena insisted. When she touched my arm today, I felt something that can't be explained by traditional medicine. It was as if all the weight that I had carried in recent years was being transferred to her. George, who was next to Lydia, agreed. I felt it too. It's as if she could absorb our pain, our bitterness. And she's dying because of it, Lydia completed softly. Dying because her heart is too pure to bear so much hatred, so much hurt. Dr. Carlos ran his hand over his face, exhausted. In his 20 years of medicine, he had never encountered a case like this. Even if this is true, he said finally, how can we help her? It was then that Eric, who had remained silent, suddenly remembered something. He took Serena's blue notebook from his pocket and opened it to the list of names. There are still 3 more people, he said, his voice laden with urgency. 3, and people I hurt, 3 stories I need to fix. He ran his eyes over the list to the next name, Robert Santos. His heart froze as he recognized him. My God, he murmured. Robert. Who is he? Asked George. My brother, Eric replied, his voice barely a whisper. My younger brother, who I haven't seen in 15 years. Helena's eyes widened. The architect? The one who developed the project for the children's hospital? Eric nodded, the guilt weighing even heavier on his heart. The hospital that I prevented from being built because I wanted the land for a commercial development. His life's project, Lydia added sadly. The dream he had since college. And I destroyed it, Eric continued, the memories now flowing, like a dammed river. Not just the project. I destroyed his trust, his faith in me as an older brother. He had mortgaged his house, invested all his savings, and you let him lose everything, a weak voice completed. It was Serena, who had woken up and was now watching them through the glass of the ICU. Everyone turned around, surprised. The girl was still very pale, connected to various devices, but her eyes maintained that supernatural glow of wisdom. How do you know about Robert? Eric asked, approaching the glass. He cries every night, Serena replied, her voice barely audible through the oxygen mask. Cries for the brother he lost, not for the money. Cries because you chose to become like our grandfather, even after promising you'd be different. The mention of their father hit Eric like a punch to the stomach. He remembered the promise he had made to Robert when they were young, after another of their father's violent outbursts. I will never be like him. I will never let power turn me into a monster. Where is he now? Asked Helena softly. In a rehab clinic, Lydia replied before Eric could speak. After he lost everything, he started drinking. He tried to take his own life 6 months ago. Serena coughed violently, spots of blood appearing on the oxygen mask. The monitors started beeping again. You need to go to him, she said between gasps. Now, we don't have much time. I can't leave you, Eric protested, placing his hand on the glass that separated them. You have to go, Serena insisted. Uncle Robert, he's worse than the others. His pain is deeper because it's the pain of a betrayed brother, and until that wound heals... She didn't complete the sentence, being interrupted by another coughing fit. More blood stained the mask. Dr. Carlos, who had observed the whole scene, In silence, finally spoke. If what you're saying is true, if her condition is linked to these emotional loose ends, then maybe there's nothing that medicine can do. Maybe the only cure is to fix what I broke, Eric completed, finally understanding the extent of what needed to be done. At that moment, Serena managed to raise her hand and touch the glass exactly where her father's hand was on the other side. For an instant, everyone in the room could feel something, an energy, a connection, something unexplainable by logic or science. "Go," she whispered. "George and Helena will stay with me." They understood. Now it's Uncle Robert's turn to understand. At 2. Eric looked at George and Helena, who nodded in silence. Lydia approached and handed him an envelope that she had taken from her apron. "The address of the clinic," she said. I always knew where he was. I always kept in touch, even when you forbade it." "Thank you," Eric replied, his voice choked with emotion, "for never having left him completely alone." Before leaving, he looked one last time at his daughter through the glass. Serena smiled weakly, and in that smile there was so much love, so much understanding, that his heart ached. "Come back soon, Dad," she whispered. "I'll be waiting. But bring Uncle Robert with you. Bring him back to our family." Willow Creek Clinic was on the outskirts of the city, a quiet place surrounded by trees and well-tended gardens. Despite the beauty of the place, Eric felt a lump in his throat as he passed through the gates. This was the place where his younger brother, once a brilliant and full of dreams architect, now struggled against his own demons. "Robert Santos is in the back garden," informed the receptionist after checking his identification. "But I need to warn you, he doesn't usually welcome visitors." Eric crossed the silent corridors of the clinic, each step echoing the weight of guilt he carried. Through a glass door, he spotted a solitary figure sitting on a bench, staring into space. His heart skipped a beat as he recognized his brother. Robert was unrecognizable. The man who had always been full of life and creativity, who used to spend sleepless nights drawing projects and dreaming of hospitals that would save lives, now seemed only a shadow of himself. His hair was completely gray, despite being only 40 years old, and his hunched back carried the weight of destroyed dreams. "Beto," Eric called softly, using his brother's childhood nickname. Robert didn't move immediately. When he finally turned his face, his eyes were empty, without any trace of the brightness that once characterized them. "So you finally came," he said, his voice hoarse as if it hadn't been used in a long time. "It only took 15 years and a suicide attempt." The words hit Eric like knives. I'm sorry," he began, but Robert interrupted him with a bitter, "Laugh you? Sorry? For what part exactly? For having stolen the land that I had bought legally? For having bribed the city hall to cancel my project? Or for having let me lose everything, including my sanity?" Eric took a step forward, but Robert raised his hand, preventing him from approaching. "No, you don't have that right. Not after all this time." "You're right," Eric admitted, remaining where he was. "I have no right whatsoever, but I need you to listen to me. It's about your niece." "Niece?" Robert frowned, confused. "You don't have children?" "I have a daughter," Eric replied, his voice trembling. "A daughter I didn't even know existed until a few days ago. And she's dying, Beto. Dying because people like me destroyed lives like yours." In the following minutes, Eric told everything. About Mara, about Serena, about the girl's extraordinary gift, and how she was paying the price for all the evil he had caused. As he spoke, he watched the expressions on his brother's face slowly change, the mask of indifference giving way to something more complex. "Do you remember the promise?" Robert asked suddenly, interrupting the narrative. "The promise you made that night, after he destroyed your drawings," Eric completed. the memory so vivid that it hurt. You were 12 years old. You had spent months working on that project for the science fair, a miniature hospital with everything planned in the smallest detail. And he tore it all up, Robert continued, his voice choked. Said his son wasn't going to be some paper pusher, that we needed to be real men, businessmen. I promised I would be different, Eric whispered, tears streaming down his face. I promised I would always protect your dreams, that I would never let power turn me into him. And just look, Robert gestured bitterly to himself. In the end, you became something even worse, because Dad, with all his violence, at least was honest in his contempt. You pretended to support me, encouraged me to invest everything in the hospital project, knowing all along that you were going to destroy it. The truth of those words was like acid running in Eric's veins. I became exactly what we swore never to be, he admitted. And now my daughter is dying because of it, an innocent child paying for her father's sins. Robert was silent for a long moment, just observing the older brother who had once been his hero, his protector. Why the children's hospital? He asked finally. Of all the projects you could have destroyed, why that one? Because it was too perfect, Eric replied, the truth finally emerging after so many years. Because you had managed to do something that I would never be able to do. Create something that really mattered, something that would save lives instead of just generating profit. And I couldn't stand to see you become a better man than me. At that moment, Eric's cell phone rang. It was Lydia, and his heart froze as he answered. Mr. Marlowe. The housekeeper's voice was choked with crying. She's gotten worse. The doctors, they can't stabilize her anymore. She's calling. For Uncle Robert. Robert, who could hear the conversation, stood up abruptly. Take me to her, he said, surprising Eric. Not for you, but for her. No child should pay for the mistakes of adults. We've already seen that happen once. We're not going to let it happen again. On the way to the hospital, Robert remained silent, looking out the window, but his eyes were no longer empty. There was something in them now, a mixture of pain and determination. You know what was the worst? He said suddenly. It wasn't losing the money, or even the project. It was losing faith in love, in family. I spent 15 years wondering how my own brother, the person who swore to protect me, could betray me like that. And I spent 15 years trying to justify the unjustifiable, Eric replied. Convincing myself that it was just business, that feelings had no place in the corporate world. I became exactly what our father wanted us to be. And now your daughter is paying the price, Robert concluded softly, just like we paid for our father's hatred. When they arrived at the hospital, they found a chaotic scene. Doctors and nurses were running in and out of the ICU, where Serena was having another crisis. Uncle Robert! The girl's weak voice sounded as soon as they entered the room. Despite all the medical paraphernalia surrounding her, her eyes lit up at the sight of her uncle. Robert stopped, shocked by the sight. The girl was so small, so fragile, but there was something in her eyes, something that reminded him of himself as a child, before the world hardened him. You came, Serena smiled weakly. I knew you would, because deep down, way down, you never stopped loving your brother. Robert approached the bed slowly, his eyes fixed on the small figure who was struggling to breathe. Helena and George, who were sitting nearby, stood up to give space to the brothers. There was something almost sacred in that moment, as if time had stopped to allow this story to finally find its way back home. How can you know? Robert asked softly, touching Serena's small hand. How can you know that I still... Because you keep all the drawings, Serena replied, her voice weak but clear. The plans for the children's hospital. They're under your bed at the clinic in a faded blue folder. You look at them every night, imagining what it could have been. Robert paled. "No one knows that, not even the nurses." "I know," Serena continued, squeezing her uncle's hand with a strength that was surprising for someone so fragile. "Just as I know that you still dream of the children who could have been saved. You see them in your dreams, running through the corridors you designed, smiling in the gardens you planned, recovering their health in the rooms you created with so much love." Tears began to stream down Robert's face. It was true. Every word was true. For 15 years, even in the darkest moments of his depression, even when alcohol seemed to be his only friend, he had never been able to get rid of those drawings. "The hospital would have been beautiful," Eric said softly, approaching the other side of the bed. "I saw the plans, Beto, before I did what I did. It was more than a hospital. It was a work of art, a place of healing and hope." "It was my dream," Robert replied, his voice choked. "It wasn't about money or recognition. It was about making a difference, about creating a place where sick children could feel at home, where healing wasn't just physical, where love was part of the treatment," Serena completed, and then she was overcome by a violent coughing fit. The monitors began to beep frantically. Dr. Carlos, who was watching everything closely, rushed to check her vital signs. "Her saturation is dropping," he announced tensely. "We need—" "No," Serena protested, removing the oxygen mask with a strength that no one knew she still possessed. "We're not done yet. Uncle Robert needs to see, needs to understand." She stretched out her hands, one to Robert and one to Eric. "Hold my hands," she asked. "Both of you, please." The brothers obeyed, each holding one of Serena's small and fragile hands. At the moment the contact was complete, something extraordinary happened. It was as if an electrical current passed between them. Images began to flow. Long-buried memories, moments that both had tried to forget. Two boys hiding under the bed, the older one hugging the younger one, while sounds of breaking glass and screams echoed through the house. Robert, at 12 years old, crying over his torn drawings, while Eric promised that he would never be like their father. The brothers sitting on the roof of the house, looking at the stars, dreaming of a different future. "You were so close." Serena's voice seemed to come from far away. "So connected. What happened wasn't just about money or power, it was about fear." "Fear?" Eric asked, his voice trembling. "Fear of loving," Serena replied, her face growing paler. "With the effort. Fear of being vulnerable, fear of becoming like him, like our grandfather. But in trying so hard not to be like him, you ended up becoming something worse. Someone who hurts not with fists, but with betrayals." Robert let out a stifled sob. Serena's words were unearthing truths that he had tried to drown in alcohol for so many years. "And you, Uncle Robert," she continued, turning to him, "your fear was different. Fear of not being good enough, of not deserving love. That's why you held so much resentment, because it was easier to hate your brother than to admit how much you still loved him, how much his betrayal had broken your heart." The heart monitors began to emit increasingly alarming sounds. Serena's face was almost transparent now, drops of cold sweat shining on her forehead. "Daughter," Eric pleaded, "please stop. You're hurting yourself." "I can't," she replied with a sad smile. "Not until you understand. Not until you remember the promise, the real promise." "What promise?" Robert asked, although something in his heart already knew the answer. "The promise you made to each other, not the one about not becoming like your father. That was just the surface. The real promise was deeper." Serena closed her eyes, as if seeking strength somewhere beyond the understanding of the adults around her. It was the promise to always be brothers, no matter what, to never let hatred overcome love. At that moment, something inside Robert broke. Years of hurt, of repressed anger, of destroyed dreams. Everything began to crumble before the simple and pure truth that came from the lips of that child. How can we fix this? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. After so much time, so much damage. Serena opened her eyes again, and there was a different light in them now, a mixture of love and urgency. With the truth, she replied simply. With forgiveness and, she hesitated, looking significantly at Eric, with the hospital. The hospital? Eric asked, confused. The land is still yours, Serena said, her voice getting weaker. And the plans still exist. Imagine, Dad. Imagine a place of healing, built not on betrayal, but on redemption. A children's hospital born not of greed, but of the love between two brothers, who have finally found their way back to each other. A profound silence fell over the room. Helena and George, who were watching everything in silence, exchanged emotional glances. Lydia was crying openly, her tears falling on the rosary she did not stop praying. "Beto!" Eric called softly, using his childhood nickname for the first time in 15 years. "What do you think? Can we try?" Robert looked at his brother, really looked, for the first time in all these years, and what he saw was not the powerful businessman who had betrayed him, but the boy who had once promised to protect him, who had held his hand on stormy nights, who had dreamed with him of a better future. "The plans would need to be updated," he said finally, his voice hoarse with emotion. "A lot has changed in medicine since then." "You can do it together," Serena whispered, a weak smile illuminating her pale face. "Build something new on the foundations of the past, something beautiful, something—" Her voice failed and her eyes closed. The monitors began to beep frantically. "Serena!" Eric shouted as Dr. Carlos and his team rushed to the bed. "She's going into respiratory collapse," the doctor announced. "We need to act now." Chaos took over the ICU. Doctors and nurses ran back and forth, voices overlapping, giving orders and asking for medications. In the midst of the confusion, Eric and Robert remained paralyzed, still holding Serena's hands, unable to move. "We need to intubate her," Dr. Carlos announced, his voice tense. "You need to leave now." "No," Eric protested. "I can't leave her alone." "Mr. Marlowe," Lydia intervened softly, pulling him by the arm. "Let the doctors work. Let's pray outside." With a broken heart, the brothers were practically dragged out of the ICU. Helena and George followed them, forming a silent and anguished group in the waiting room. The minutes dragged on like hours, each second marked by the merciless ticking of the clock on the wall. Robert paced back and forth, his hands trembling with a need he hadn't felt in a long time, the need for a drink. But something stronger kept him sober, the image of Serena's eyes, the purity of her smile, the ancient wisdom in her words. "The plans," he said suddenly, breaking the heavy silence. "I need the hospital plans." Everyone looked at him, surprised by the urgency in his voice. "Now?" Eric asked, confused. "Yes, now," Robert replied, a new energy animating his movements. "She needs something to hold on to, Eric, something that proves that it wasn't just empty words. She needs to know that we're really going to do this." An understanding lit up Helena's face. "He's right. Remember what she said about carrying our pains. If she can feel that we're really changing, really fixing things, maybe that will help her fight," George completed, standing up. "I can go to the clinic to get the plans. I know where it is." "I'll go with you," Lydia offered. "I know the nurse is there. It will be easier to get authorization." As George and Lydia departed on their mission, Robert turned to his brother. "I need paper, pencils, anything to draw, and I need you to tell me everything about the land, dimensions, exact location, soil conditions." Eric blinked, surprised at the change in his brother. The broken man from the clinic had disappeared, replaced by the passionate architect he had known in his youth. "The land is still there," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "I was never able to build anything on it. It was as if as if it was waiting. Helena watched the interaction of the brothers with tears in her eyes. "I'll call some contacts," she offered. "I still know people in the healthcare area. We can start organizing the bureaucratic part." The following hours were of intense activity. George and Lydia returned with the faded blue folder full of old plans. Robert spread the drawings across the floor of the waiting room, immediately starting to make notes and adaptations. Eric sat next to his brother, absorbing every detail of the projects he had once despised. Now he could see the genius behind each stroke, the rooms planned to allow parents to stay comfortably with their children, the recreation areas that seemed straight out of a fairy tale, the therapeutic gardens that would transform the treatment into a journey of healing and hope. "Here," Robert pointed to an area of the project, "we can expand the oncology wing. Treatment techniques have evolved a lot in recent years. And here," his pencil flew across the paper, "a more modern rehab center with state-of-the-art equipment." "How much is it going to cost?" Helena asked practically. "It doesn't matter," Eric replied without hesitation. "I'll sell everything I need to. My apartment, my cars, my stocks." "That won't be necessary," a weak voice interrupted. Everyone turned around. Dr. Carlos was standing in the doorway of the ICU, his face showing a mixture of exhaustion and disbelief. How is she?" Eric asked, his heart almost stopping. "Stable," the doctor replied, running his hand over his tired face. "But there's something you need to see." The group followed Dr. Carlos to the ICU. Serena was awake, still connected to the devices, but her eyes were open and alert. And to everyone's surprise, a small smile played on her lips. "You can feel it, can't you?" she asked softly as they approached. "The change has already begun." Robert knelt next to the bed, spreading the updated drawings where she could see. "Look, a kiddo, we're making it happen. The hospital is going to become a reality." Serena's eyes shone as she examined the plans. "It's going to be even more beautiful than in your dreams, Uncle Robert. Because now it's not just your dream, it's the dream of all of us." "But how are we going to pay for all this?" Helena asked, always practical. "Even with all of Eric's resources." "The settlement," George interrupted, suddenly understanding. "The money you gave me, Eric, it's more than enough to start." "And mine too," Helena added, reaching for her purse and taking out the check she had received earlier. "I don't need that much. Half of it already allows me to restart my life, regain custody of my son. The rest can go to the hospital." "See?" Serena smiled, her voice stronger now. "That's how healing happens. It's not about money or power. It's about transforming pain into love, transforming mistakes into something beautiful." Dr. Carlos, who was checking the monitors, shook his head in astonishment. "Her vital signs are improving every minute. It's as if her body is responding to something beyond medicine." "It's because the real disease is being cured," Serena replied simply. "The disease of the heart, the disease of the soul." She stretched out her hands, one to her father and one to her uncle, exactly as she had done before. But this time, when they held her hands, there was no pain, no traumatic visions. Instead, everyone in the room felt something different. A wave of warmth, of hope, of possibilities. "There's still one name on the list," Serena said softly, looking significantly at Eric. "One last person who needs to be found, the most difficult of all." Eric picked up the blue notebook, opening it to the list page. His heart stopped as he read the last name. Clara Mendez, his mother, who had left 20 years ago, unable to bear her husband's violence and her son's transformation. "She's alive," Serena whispered. "And she's closer than you think." The silence that followed Serena's words was deafening. Robert, who had leaned against the wall to keep from falling, looked at his brother with a mixture of shock and hope. Clara Mendez, a name they hadn't spoken in 2 decades, a wound that had never completely healed. How can you know? Eric asked, his voice trembling. We looked for her for years, hired detectives. She didn't want to be found, Serena replied softly. Not while you were like our grandfather, not while power and money were more important than love. Lydia, who had remained silent until then, stepped forward. Her hands trembled as she pulled something from her apron pocket, a small, yellowed envelope. Forgive me, she said, tears streaming down her wrinkled face. I always knew where she was. She made me promise not to tell, but now... You knew? Eric and Robert asked in unison, their voices mixing astonishment and hurt. She works as a volunteer at an orphanage, Lydia continued, her voice choked. The Santa Clara Children's Home, on the outskirts of the city. She takes care of sick children, children that no one else wants. Robert let out a stifled sob. The name of the children's hospital. I was going to call it Santa Clara Hospital because of her. I know, Serena smiled weakly. She knows too. She saw the plans in the newspaper before everything went wrong. She cried for days, proud of the son who had become the man she always dreamed of. Why didn't she ever look for us? Eric asked, his voice laden with pain. Because she needed to be sure, Serena replied. Sure that you had really changed, that the cycle of violence, whether physical or emotional, had finally been broken. Helena, who was watching everything in silence, approached Serena's bed. That's why you're sick, isn't it? It's not just because of the pain your father caused me, George. Robert, it's because of the pain of an entire family torn apart. Serena nodded weakly. A pain that passes from generation to generation. From the violent great-grandfather who beat his son, from the grandfather who destroyed his son's dreams, from the father who betrayed his own brother. All that pain, all that denied love, needed to stop somewhere. And it stopped with you, Robert completed, finally understanding. An innocent child carrying the weight of 3 generations of wasted love. But it can't end like this, Eric said suddenly, a new determination in his voice. I won't allow my daughter to die because of our mistakes. I'm going to find our mother right now. No, Serena protested, holding her father's hand with surprising strength. You need to go together, both of you, and you need to go prepared not only to find her, but to find yourselves. Dr. Carlos, who had remained silent until then, checked the monitors once more. Her vital signs are stable now, he said. If you need to go, this is the moment. George stepped forward. Helena and I will stay with her. Lydia, too. Go find your mother. Robert picked up the folder with the hospital plans. Let's take this, he said. She needs to see that it's not just a dream this time, that it's real. Eric nodded, unable to speak. Before leaving, he leaned down and kissed Serena's forehead. I promise I'll bring your grandmother back, he whispered. I promise our family will be complete again. I know, Serena smiled, her eyes shining with that ancient wisdom that everyone had learned to respect. But remember, she's hurting too. She needs healing too. The Santa Clara Children's Home was a simple but welcoming place. An old mansion adapted to receive abandoned children, surrounded by a well-kept garden where colorful flowers danced in the afternoon breeze. When Eric and Robert got out of the car, they saw a gray-haired woman kneeling among the flower beds, helping a child in a wheelchair plant a daisy seedling. Even after 20 years, even with the distance that separated them, they immediately recognized their mother. Clara Mendez had aged with dignity. Her face, although marked by time and sadness, retained the same sweetness that they remembered from childhood. That sweetness that not even years of suffering had managed to erase. Donna Clara, one of the orphanage employees called. There are 2 people wanting to talk to you. Clara raised her eyes from the flowerbed and froze. For a moment it seemed that time had stopped. She looked at her sons as if she were seeing ghosts. Ghosts of 2 boys she had once been forced to abandon. Mom, Robert called softly, his voice choked. Clara brought her hand to her mouth, stifling a sob. The child in the wheelchair looked from one face to the other, intuitively feeling the intensity of the moment. How did you find me?" Clara asked finally, her voice barely a whisper. "Serena showed us the way," Eric replied, taking a step forward. "Our daughter, Mom. Your granddaughter." "Granddaughter?" Clara blinked, confused. "But she's in the hospital," Robert interrupted gently. "She's very sick, Mom, and she has a special gift, a gift that is killing her because she carries all the pain of our family," Clara completed, surprising her sons. "Just like I carried it. Just like you carried it, Robert. When you drew your hospitals trying to heal not only others, but yourself." She stood up slowly, wiping the dirt from her hands on her apron. Her eyes scanned her sons' faces, noting every change, every mark that time had left. "You've changed," she said simply. "I can see it in your eyes. The hatred is finally gone." "Thanks to Serena," Eric replied, tears flowing freely down his face. "She showed us what we had become, made us remember who we should have been." Robert opened the folder he was carrying, showing the hospital plans. "We're going to build it, Mom. The hospital I always dreamed of. But this time it will be different. This time it will be about love, not about power." Clara took the drawings with trembling hands, her eyes scanning every detail. "Santa Clara Hospital," she read in the header of one of the projects, and her tears finally began to fall. "Come with us," Eric pleaded. "Serena needs you. We all need you." Clara looked at the child in the wheelchair who was watching, everything with attentive eyes. "Maria," she called softly, "do you mind if I'm away for a few hours? I need to meet my granddaughter." The girl smiled and nodded. "Go, Donna Clara. You always say that family is the best medicine." Clara turned to her sons, and for the first time in 20 years she opened her arms. "My boys," she whispered as they ran into her embrace. "You've finally come home." The return to the hospital was different from the trip there. In the car, Clara sat between her two sons, holding a hand of each, as she had done when they were little. The silence was no longer heavy, but filled with an almost palpable expectation. 20 years of absence were being filled, not with words, but with small gestures, a handshake, an understanding look, a hesitant smile. When they arrived at the ICU, they found an unexpected scene. Serena was sitting on the bed, more flushed than before, talking animatedly with Helena and George. Lydia was arranging flowers in a vase near the window, and Dr. Carlos was examining the monitors with an expression of astonishment. "It's incredible," the doctor murmured when he saw them. "Enter, in the last 40 minutes since you left, her vital signs have begun to improve. Consistently. It's as if she could feel that the family was coming together again," Clara completed softly, her eyes fixed on the granddaughter she had never known. Serena turned her face towards the voice and smiled, a smile so similar to Clara's when young that Robert felt his heart clench. "Grandma," she called, extending her arms. Clara approached the bed slowly, her legs trembling. When she finally reached Serena and took her in her arms, something extraordinary happened. A soft light seemed to envelop grandmother and granddaughter, and everyone in the room could feel a change in the air, as if an ancient curse was finally being broken. "You did it," Serena whispered in her grandmother's ear. "You resisted all these years, taking care of other children, keeping your heart open, waiting for the right moment." "How did you know?" Clara asked, pulling away just enough to look into her granddaughter's eyes. "How did you know that I was at the orphanage?" "Because that's where the stories connect," Serena replied, her voice stronger than ever. Santa Clara Orphanage, the hospital that will be called Santa Clara, you, Clara. They're not coincidences, they're points of light on the map of our healing." Helena approached, holding Serena's latest tests. "The doctors can't explain it," she said, showing the papers. "It's as if the disease were literally disappearing from her body." "Because the true cure was never in the medicines," George observed wisely. "It was in reconciliation, in forgiveness, in rediscovered love." Robert approached the window, looking at the city that stretched out beyond. "The hospital land," he said, turning to his brother. "Is it still the way I left it?" "Better," Eric replied, a smile forming on his face. "While you were talking, I made a few calls. The land next door is also for sale. We can expand the project, create not just a hospital, but a complete healing center. With an attached orphanage," Clara added softly, "so that no child needs to be alone during treatment." "And a special wing for rehabilitation," Helena contributed. "I can help with the pharmaceutical part, ensure that all medications are quality and affordable." "I'll need a legal advisory team," George smiled, "to ensure that everything is done the right way this time." Lydia, who was watching everything with tears in her eyes, approached Serena. "And you, kiddo? What do you want to see in this hospital?" Serena looked at every face in the room. Her father, who had rediscovered the path of love. Her uncle, who had found the strength to forgive. Her grandmother, who never stopped believing. Helena and George, who transformed their own pain into a desire to help. And Lydia, who kept all the secrets until the right moment to reveal them. "I want to see love in every room," she replied simply. "I want every child who enters here to feel what I feel now. That no matter how sick they are, no matter how difficult the treatment, there is a family waiting for them. Not always the family by blood, but a family of the heart." Clara kissed her granddaughter's forehead, and in that kiss was all the love she hadn't been able to give her sons during the years of separation. "And so," she said softly, "the circle closes. Pain transforms into healing, hatred into love, separation into union. And the hospital that was born from betrayal," Robert completed, "will become a monument to forgiveness." Serena smiled, and her smile lit up the room more than the sun that entered through the window. "It's not the end of the story," she said, looking at each one. "It's just the beginning of a new one, a story in which love wins over power, in which family is stronger than money, in which healing comes not only from medicines, but from hearts that have finally learned to beat together again." Dr. Carlos made a final note in the chart and smiled. "Well, Miss Serena, I think we officially have no reason to keep you here any longer. Your tests are perfect, your vital signs stable. I would say this is a miracle, but—" "It's not a miracle, Doctor," Serena interrupted him gently. "It's just love, the most powerful medicine in the world." And so, on that spring afternoon, a broken family finally became whole again. The Santa Clara Hospital would begin to be built the following week, rising not as a monument to power, but as a testament to the love that can heal all wounds, even those that seem impossible to heal. Because sometimes it takes a child to remind us of the promises we made and forgot. Sometimes it takes carrying the pain of generations to finally transform it into light. And sometimes the greatest miracle of all is not the healing of the body, but the healing of the heart.